premiers are playing a big role in this election. Doug Ford has just tweeted, President Trump is at it again. His 25% tariffs on cars and light trucks will do nothing more than increase costs for hard-working American families. U.S. markets are already on the decline as the president causes more chaos and uncertainty. Trump is putting American jobs at risk. I've spoken with Prime Minister Carney, Ford writes. We agree Canada needs to stand firm, strong and united. I fully support the federal government preparing retaliatory tariffs to show that we'll never back down. So that is the Premier of Ontario, who just won an election running against Donald Trump. Another Premier who's playing a role in this, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who is vehemently defending her decision to travel to Florida this week and sit on stage with a far-right podcaster. Smith is scheduled to make an appearance at a fundraiser with Ben Shapiro. Critics are demanding she canceled the trip, but speaking earlier today in the provincial legislature, Smith said it is her duty to go and defend Alberta in the face of tariffs.
I'm fiercely criticized for going into the lion's den to change the hearts and minds of the very Americans that we need on Canada's side to avoid a trade war with the most powerful economy on earth. They want this lady and Alberta to just sit down and shut up. Well, here is my response to that. I will not be silent. Alberta will not be silent. We will not be pushed around and called traitors for merely having the courage to actually do something about our nation's and province's predicament other than merely indulging in self-righteous tantrums. And until this danger to Alberta and our economy is passed, they're going to have to roll me off in a stretcher before I will stop fighting for our province and our people.
Okay, there's a whole lot of moving parts in this election. There are the national election campaigns by the parties, there is the president, there's the Ontario Premier who's adopted this Captain Canada mantle, and then there's the Premier of Alberta who Sherelle, a lot of Conservatives were hoping would dial it down after the Breitbart interview came to light. And more or less she said in that interview, she was urging the Trump administration to calibrate their tariff response in a way that would stop helping the Liberals. I won't say she's trying to help them, but stop helping the Liberals is what she was saying. How does all of this affect things? Because Trump talking to Prime Minister Carney about, Ford talking to Prime Minister Carney about how to deal with Trump, and Smith doing her thing. What does this do to the whole narrative here?
Well, I'm not sure how it helps things. I mean, she talked about, you know, she has the courage to go and talk to these people. I mean, Ben Shapiro, who is involved in this, even he's already on the I'm not sure why we're targeting Canada train. So it's not, I'm not really sure who she's expecting to reach. I suppose maybe they figured the PragerU audience has some very much, has people who are very much in line with Trump and the tariffs, and, you know, speaking to them is, I suppose, always a good idea. But yeah, it is a little baffling, I gotta say, because if you're talking about how do we defend Canadians at this critical juncture, kind of going out of your way to talk to the people who are necessarily doing anything to help you, it seems like a strange tactic at a time when there could be so much energy placed on doing other things.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro said a couple of things. He said, I don't understand why we're doing this, but he's also said Canada is a silly country that should be absorbed without voting rights for its citizens. Like, you know, these guys just do what they got to do for clicks and money.
Yeah.
But Tim, this seems to me, this sets off a whole new set piece in this campaign, where Mark Carney will keep campaigning here in Canada, but maybe Melanie Joly and Dominic LeBlanc and François-Philippe Champagne go to Washington, like Doug Ford did, and you get a Liberal leadership campaign, and then you get the government in action as almost like a secondary campaign, while premiers continue to intrude into the national election in a way that is material.
The only one who's intruding in the national election is Danielle Smith. The rest seem to be acting in the bigger interests of Canada. Look, Danielle Smith has not lost her skills as a shock jock. She was very good in Alberta. Everything she said there that you played would have been great talk radio, but the problem is it's not about talk radio anymore. Former Prime Minister Trudeau went to Florida.
Okay, I got to stop you for a second. Doug Ford is scrumming. We got to go to Doug Ford. He's live at Queen's Park.
And it's going to drop. It's dropping today. The market's going to dive down on April the 2nd because there's no certainty. There's no certainty for the American people. And they're going to realize that. And I always say our number one ally are the American people. So it looks like we're back at it again. I just want to see exactly what he's preparing for April 2nd. As he says, he's doing the global tariffs around the world. In the same sentence, he says he's going to be very nice to his allies. Well, let's see how nice he's going to be. So we'll be prepared, and we'll convene the FMM, and I'll be speaking to the Prime Minister as we move forward over the next few days, as well as I spoke to him today.
Are you ready to do the electricity tariffs at this point?
Well, what I
Export tax?
yeah, what I want to see, I want to see where he's coming from on April the 2nd. I want to take a Team Canada approach. I do not want to hurt other provinces on that, but I can assure you one thing. We're going to make sure that we inflict as much pain as possible to the American people without inflicting pain on the Canadian population. And that's the reason we've done 2 rounds of 30 billion and 30 billion. And the last 65 billion, it will hurt. I'll be very, very frank, but I've talked to a tremendous amount of people going to events, and I'm very transparent by saying we have 2 options here. We either roll over as a country, and he runs us over 15 times and gets what he wants, or we feel a little bit of pain, and we fight like we've never fought before. I prefer the latter. I believe in fighting, and we'll have a big impact on the American people. He thinks, you know, all he's doing is hurting the American people. He thinks the cost is going to go down for automobiles in the U.S. It's the total opposite. The costs are going to go skyrocketing. It keeps calling out countries. He's really pointing us out for the most part. Ontario, 50% of the parts within the vehicles are American. And, you know, how do you dissect? They were showing me drawings today of all the different parts from all over the world, by the way, that goes in one vehicle. A lot are Canadian parts. A lot of Canadian companies they have plants down in the U.S. I understand they have approximately 127 plants employing over 50,000 people directly. So let's see how they can dissect it. I find it very, very difficult to believe that they can dissect every single part in an automobile by April the 2nd, or will be implemented on April the 3rd.
When you say dollar for dollar tariffs, does that mean Canada would implement 25% tariff on U.S. automobiles coming in?
Well, first of all, thank you, Richard. You know something, I really want to sit down with the rest of the premiers. I don't want to speak on behalf of all the premiers without sitting down with them, and without getting into it a lot deeper with the Prime Minister. That 65 billion of tariffs that we have on the table that we can launch towards the U.S., we have to run through every tariff and minimize the pain for Canadians, maximize the pain for Americans. And I feel terrible for the Americans, but it's one person, it's President Trump, that's creating this chaos, as I call it.
Have you been having any conversations with the heads of these auto companies? Have they given Ontario any reassurance that they will remain in Ontario and not pick up stakes and move to the U.S.?
I have talked to a lot of the leaders of these auto companies. A lot changes, as you know, over a 4 or 5 day period. I'll request another meeting with all the Canadian CEOs, presidents of the auto sector, be it General Motors and Ford and Stellantis, Toyota and Honda, and also speak to Volkswagen on their production facility in St. Thomas.
In your meetings with Lutnick and with the
Yes.
officials of the U.S. Trade Representative, was there not an agreement that there would be no surprises, there would be some sort of heads up? Did you get any indication that this was coming today, or is it impossible to get heads up when the
Yeah.
guy making decisions is the President of the United States?
Well, you answered my question. You're bang on 100% that we thought we'd be informed. The word "no surprises" came up in the meeting, and sure enough, well, there's a surprise. I can't predict, or I honestly believe the American administration some days can't predict what President Trump's going to say. So he's come out early now and said these are going to be implemented on April the 2nd. You know, I always believe the day he calls, what day does he call that on April the 2nd? Liberation. Okay, so President Trump's calling it Liberation Day. I call it termination day for American workers. I know, President Trump likes telling people you're fired. I didn't think he meant auto workers in the U.S. when he said that.
What could this
President
job?
Trump, though, on that,
Yes.
has repeatedly said that in the end, in the long term, this is going to be better for the U.S. economy. So what do you say to that?
Well, I don't know how he can think it's going to be better. You can't flick on a switch and create an auto plant overnight. We buy, over 400% more cars than Mexico. Mexico's producing probably 300 to 400% more than we're producing. It ranges from 1.3 to 1.4 million. And Mexico's well over 3.5 million, and God only knows what sort of parts are in their cars. A lot are coming over from China and slapping that made in Mexico sticker. So we buy as many cars off the U.S. as we sell down there. And again, I do not understand for the life of me how he thinks, when you put on a 25% tariff, how Americans aren't gonna feel the pain. Because I'll encourage the Prime Minister to target American cars as well. That's what we're going to focus on. And all of a sudden, over a certain period of time, a lot of these large auto manufacturers here in Canada are stockpiling parts. So once that runs out, you'll see possibly assembly lines shut down in both countries simultaneously.
When it comes to economic stimulus, will
Yes.
that be ready on the 2nd of April, or do you think
Yes.
you have to wait?
I believe it'll be ready. I won't speak for the Prime Minister. He has mentioned a few numbers, and again, I'd rather him speak for the plan that he has, but we'll be ready.
What about provincially, the billions of dollars that you've promised as well for companies to draw down from? Will that be ready on April 2nd?
Well, we'll see what sectors that are hit the hardest, and we'll allocate a lot of those funds to the sectors that are hit the hardest, be it auto or anything else. And this is the tough part of negotiating with President Trump, not directly, but through Secretary Lutnick, is you don't know what's coming from day to day. You have to brace yourself, get ready, read and react. But I'm confident with all the premiers in Canada. I'm confident with the federal government right now that we'll retaliate appropriately, and we'll hit them as hard as we possibly can.
Do you think he's doing this as a really quickly in terms of the Team Canada approach? We were dealing with it in the middle of a provincial election, now we're in the middle of a federal election, and we have to somehow respond. What is that like?
Well, just similar to when during my election, I was out there responding, and I expect the government of today, and who knows what happens by the end of the election, but they need to respond, and they will respond appropriately.
Do you think Trump accelerated this to change the channel on his Signal Gate controversy?
Yeah, good. Excellent question. I said the same thing in the room there. This could be a possible channel changer, and I can't guarantee you, but it's an awful coincidence that they have this and then they try to change. Yeah.
This Fortress AmCan idea
Yes.
you've been pitching, when do you pull that off?
Well, I don't think we should. I don't think we should ever pull it. I think we're just stronger together if we work together, and that's the message to the American people and to the elected officials, no matter if it's Republican or Democrat. Let's build an AmCan fortress. Let's build the two strongest countries in the world, and let's see what happens after April 2nd. We will be ready. We'll be convening meetings from here moving forward all throughout the weekend as well. I'll be communicating, calling the other premiers and having a conversation before the FMM. What I don't want to do, Ontario's the largest province, will get hit the hardest. I want to protect the jobs and protect the people and communities and businesses here in Ontario, but I also have to take into consideration on retaliating that's going to hurt the rest of the country, punish basically the rest of the country based on our retaliation. But I'll tell you one thing, we aren't going to roll over. We're going to do everything we possibly can on retaliatory tariffs.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Okay, that was Ontario Premier Doug Ford getting back on a trade war footing after adopting a more positive response from his recent visit to Washington, D.C. and a meeting with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and other administrative officials, saying that essentially what Donald Trump calls Liberation Day, which is April 2nd when he brings in tariffs, he is calling Termination Day, and referencing the sort of the shtick President Trump used to use when he was a reality TV star officially on his show, saying you're fired. Ford now saying that this will apply to U.S. auto workers. Says he's going to speak with the other premiers, the prime minister, to figure out how to respond to this. But clearly the push is for retaliation. We are trying to navigate exactly what this means for Canada. It is unclear. I am texting with Flavio Volpe from the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. He says, based on the way the president has described it, it applies to Canada, but they have not seen anything in writing. So if the interpretation that Flavio Volpe has and which others have had, 25% is on top of existing tariffs. Canada under CUSMA is 0%. Oh, and we just have a note coming in from USMCA compliant automobile parts will remain tariff-free until the Secretary of Commerce in consultation with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Okay, so it's fluid. The initial reading of what the president said, as stated, is that we're going to be hit with a 25% tariff. The paperwork will tell us the tale. So Flavio Volpe, Brian Kingston, they're working through it. I'm texting with senior members of the government. They don't know what this means. I said, what does this mean? And this person said, chaos. So there we are. So we're going to do a little round of chaos with the power panel before we say goodbye to them. So Tim, I cut you off there before we went to Premier Ford, who's angry and as confused as the rest of us, it seems.
Well, and we were talking about Premier Danielle Smith. Look, as I was saying, going to Florida has not proved to be well for former Prime Minister Trudeau or Danielle Smith, who the last time she was down there got navigational advice from Kevin O'Leary, and we all know you shouldn't take navigational advice from Kevin O'Leary. The best thing here is to follow the Doug Ford lead and the lead of other premiers. Be on Team Canada. Stop worrying about your own domestic politics. Ben Shapiro, Kevin O'Leary, other right-wing commentators in the United States are going to do shag all for Canada. You are but a prop in their game. Stay together.
There's no threshold to appease, right? It seems to be the lesson. If people haven't learned that by now, but Jordan, this is it. There's no defense spending you're going to hit, no fentanyl shipment you're going to hit that's going to stop this.
This is not a rational thing. It's not like that. It's not transactional. I think that there were hopes early on that it was, but that's not the case. Trump is a chaos machine. And I think what you saw there was really just a masterful contrast between what Premier Ford was doing, where he was talking very clearly about working with the other provinces and about wanting to consult, wanting to lead on a national approach. And what we're seeing from Danielle Smith, which is really going down, stoking also regional divisions within Canada, trying to get a carve out for just Alberta, but not even demonstrating any effectiveness in being able to do that. And I think Tim is exactly right. She's being used by those right-wing personalities in the United States. But the problem is that it's not just bad for her. It's quite dangerous for the country.
Yeah, it's interesting, Amanda, like, and I'm not trying to pick on Danielle Smith here, but she has repeatedly made the point, do not use our oil and gas assets as any kind of leverage in this. The only industry that is constantly and consistently being specifically targeted is the auto sector in Canada, right? So, it is an interesting dynamic that she is the one drawing the toughest line in the sand of what is off the table, and it's not even her core industry that is the most threatened by the action coming out of the White House.
Exactly. And I mean, we're facing down the greatest threat in a generation. And her response is to go sit on a stage with a right-wing podcaster who says that Canada should be absorbed. Like, how does that play for you? And I agree with Jordan. I think that clear contrast with Ford, who has really masterfully set himself up in this Team Canada persona, is not only like good politics, but it's also good policy. It's good for the country. The united approach, which, listen, of course they want to divide us when they're in the middle of a negotiation. We're not even in a negotiation. We're the recipients of their bad news. We're not getting the heads up. Exactly. And I think that his approach also does something else for Canadians, and that's it's a bit to reassure. It's to say, he made the comment that Prime Minister Carney has a response ready, has a number. That's what he said. He said we have a response ready. I think it's important for Canadians to know that retaliatory measures will be in place. He also, made the comments that this is going to be painful for Americans and for American families, and that might be the only tactic that actually gets to Trump. When the markets disintegrate, when prices go up, and the American people are the ones to face those consequences. But again, the Team Canada approach is the approach that both unites us, but also puts us in a much more powerful negotiating position.
Okay, Sherelle, I'm going to get you to weigh in.
Look, using Donald Trump's math, he said $600 billion to $1 trillion in whatever time frame, a year, 2 years. Pushing forward with the Canadian government just put up a bunch of billboards in the U.S. saying this is a tax on Americans. Where does that $1 trillion going to come from? It's going to come from the Americans. So nailing that message home, and that's what Premier Ford was doing just now, saying, this is about wanting to inflict as much pain on the Americans as possible while having as little as possible on the Canadians. Those are the types of messages that need to be getting across right now, because right now the only thing that is going to stop Donald Trump, the only thing that he's going to listen to are, his essentially shareholders.
Yeah. Okay. From an election perspective, this is terrible for the Conservatives, for the New Democrats, and for the Bloc Québécois. This makes Mark Carney the main character, along with people like Doug Ford, and they just squeeze right out of the story to some degree here.
Yeah, well, and back to Doug Ford. I mean, it worked to his effect in his campaign because people want to see the leader, the premier, the prime minister, Pierre Poilievre and Jagmeet Singh are going to have to find constructive ways. And what will be really interesting, do they take a page from Doug Ford and say, we're with you, Prime Minister? Different, counterintuitive, not likely to happen, but could pay some dividends in the end. You never actually know, because I think, don't underestimate the power of people seeing leadership, of being together and letting somebody else carry the flag.
Jordan, it seems Pierre Poilievre, his strongest language on Trump so far has been to knock it off, is the language he uses in the rally. It seems that is going to have to change.
Well, or not, you know, and I think it's been evident that that has been a catastrophic problem for him over the last 2 weeks in particular, as we've really started to see the Conservative numbers slide. It's very clear that his attachment to Trump is one of the reasons why that's happening, and yet he still has not strengthened his language. So that means that that's something that he feels very strongly about, or that he and his campaign team are quite wedded to, and they don't want to give it up. And at the end of the day, it's damaging their campaign, and he's going to have to choose. Is he going to speak to the roughly, third to 40% of his vote base who are a little bit pro-Trump, or is he going to be looking for that wider audience and speaking more broadly to Canadians who are really alarmed and concerned about what's happening here?
You know, Amanda, as I look at it, there are three truly national figures who are Conservative leaders right now, and it's Danielle Smith, Doug Ford, and Pierre Poilievre. And Pierre Poilievre is getting squeezed between the two different ends of the Conservative spectrum that those two premiers represent right now, right?
Definitely. And he's also, they've really had to, we've talked about this before, had to recalibrate and pivot their message. I mean, his message consistently was that Canada is broken. And so the idea now that he has to be the one to deliver actually, we're not broken, we're united, we're in this together, is very challenging. And I think Tim's absolutely right. If he were to take on both some stronger language, but actually to be seen as a defender of the country and somebody who's going to get behind what the government is prepared to do, would probably go a long way to resonate with Canadians. Very unlikely to happen. He seems to have a blind spot here. He seems to be very stubborn on these messages, and the temptation to continue with the messages that worked for him 6, 12 months ago that are not working today, they just seem to be slow to play catch up on those messages.